Welcome everyone to the panel discussion on generative AI for the energy, resources, and industrial sector. My name is Jessica Kasmer. I'm a partner with Omnia, Deloitte's artificial intelligence practice, with a very specific focus on energy and resources. So I'm very excited to welcome you to our webcast today. Before we begin, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We do acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of the land we are on today. Deloitte Canada has offices with representation across the country, and we acknowledge that our offices reside on the traditional, treaty, and unceded territories as part of Turtle Island, and is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples today. In terms of a bit of housekeeping, this webcast will be recorded and will be made available on the Deloitte AI Institute webpage. You will be able to view the video in a language of your choosing and send it to your friends and colleagues that haven't been able to join us today. And now let's get started. So I'm sure over the past few months, everyone here has heard a lot about generative AI and ChatGPT. I know when an AI topic has gone mainstream because I get a phone call from my dad saying, so what's this ChatGPT thing and how can I use it? But it's not just my dad that I've been speaking to about AI. I spend every day speaking to my clients and folks in industry about the importance of AI applications in their business and how they can bring the capabilities of AI to greatly improve not just their operations, but also make them more competitive in the future. However, honestly, efforts to date around the adoption of AI in energy and resources has been quite limited to small-scale pilots and proof of concepts that just focus on narrow parts of the business. I believe largely this is because of obstacles that a lot of my clients are facing around access to siloed data, poor data quality, and also a limited availability of individuals that can actually leverage or utilize AI insights in their day-to-day tasks. In fact, as we look forward, the ability to leverage automation or AI insights will be absolutely critical and will require a unique upskilling of our folks in the energy industry as compared to, say, financial services. And that's largely because a lot of the current ER&I functional roles still revolve around both the physical work and physical assets that we deal with, many of which are geographically scattered or disconnected from digital networks, as I'm sure some of you can attest if you've ever worked anywhere in Northern Canada, and access to cell networks is very poor. But this is really where data modernization and generative AI holds true potential. By harnessing the power of AI, companies can remotely monitor and analyze vast amounts of information, including data from field sensors, drone video data, obviously weather radar data, seismic data, etc., and truly derive insights with a level of timeliness, accuracy, and thoroughness that humans alone just simply cannot achieve. From a generative AI perspective, the transformative shift that we are seeing today is really in part because the ability of the tool to be user-friendly and create an accessible user interface. It's truly automated the ability to drive software engineering and make it faster and easier to develop digital solutions in a way we haven't seen before. And these solutions are not just limited to the ability to write Shakespearean prose about your dog, which I can say that I've tested and it works brilliantly. But from a professional perspective, there are many use cases that can work, and we'll talk a lot about them on the panel today. But some examples are the ability to create unlimited engineering designs and test scenarios, or summarize and log routine maintenance activities, or even send an email to your suppliers when they're questioning about the status of a current invoice. Generative AI is really bringing a shift to data that I haven't seen in my career to date, honestly. I believe it has the power to democratize data and bring insights and automation to individuals at all levels of the organization, and in particular, those working in the field that are dealing day to day with the physical assets, and with the hope that it can create both more efficient and easy ability to do your day-to-day work. However, and there's always a however, I'm sure, despite the sheer speed at which Gen AI is coming at us, both personally and professionally, it will require us to pause and start to think differently. We really can't enter into this space blindly. In the ER&I sector, we recommend focusing on specific use cases that can be deployed both with a high level of accuracy, but also while adhering to both security and privacy. And while doing so, it is important to put measures in place across your enterprise to ensure that the applications are being both developed and deployed in a way that is both trustworthy and responsible. So, on that note, before I introduce you to our esteemed panel of experts, I do want to flip over to a quick poll to learn a bit more about ways in which you think generative AI can be used in your organization today. So to do so, you can join us at slido.com and use the passcode 3927426. We have a very, very quiet group today.
Just give it a few minutes while people are just logging in their responses.
Optimizing production plans, I love that. Meeting minutes, yes, absolutely. That is one I am very excited to use. Content development and summarization, absolutely. If you think about it, we may never have to write a status report again, which is very exciting in my world. So it looks like content development and operational efficiency seem to be the top hits right now. Making money, I like that one. Call center, definitely. That's a use case we'll be further exploring later as well. Dashboarding, improving EX, absolutely. Quick reference guides for sure would be one. All right. So I think with that, we might move over and start to introduce this amazing panel that we have with you today. All right. So Todd Wernell. Todd is an inspiring digital technology and change leader. He's currently leading Bruce Power's Information Security Division as their Chief Information Security Officer, CISO. He drives digital transformation and unlocks the power of data within organizations while ensuring safe, reliable outcomes within cyber and information security programs. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you for having me today, Jessica.
Absolutely. Daniel Lau. So Daniel is the Director of Enterprise Digital Technology at Ontario Power Generation. He is an accomplished technology leader with a passion for leveraging cutting-edge digital solutions in order to drive business growth and innovation. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here, and I'm excited for the talk today.
Excellent. Anand Nimkar is our Conversational AI and Generative AI Services and Partnership Leader in Canada. He's focused on technology delivery and strategy of natural language processing, or NLP, solutions in both customer and employee servicing processes. And he has led a number of large engineering teams on both AI platforms, cloud, and digital transformation programs. And then, welcome to our panel.
Thanks for having me.
And Sonia. Sonia is a technical specialist in our generative AI practice. She did her graduate studies in AI, specializing in generative models. She spent the past 13 years working in Japan in various industries, the last of which were really focused on the space industry, leveraging AI models and geospatial analysis applications from satellite data, which is amazing. Welcome, Sonia.
Glad to be here.
And finally, our moderator, Kevin Lavin. Kevin leads our energy and resources sector in Omnia AI, and is also the head of our data science practice. His AI experience started in 2003 with a master's degree at the University of Toronto Machine Learning Lab. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all our panelists as we actually get started with the event now. And thank you for those opening words to get us started and set the stage. We would like to make sure that this event is interactive. So for all of you joining on the line, please feel free to use the QA set function within the application. We may answer your questions in chat live, or we might save some of them for the question and answer session at the end of the session. In terms of the sequence of the session, as is shown in the next slide, we've got 3 parts that we're going to be speaking through. The first part is answering the question, what is generative AI? There's lots of information in the news, there's lots of hype, and there's some real things behind it. And we're going to start by giving you a brief introduction to what it really is. For part B of our session, we're going to speak about how it applies to the energy, resources, and industrial sector. This isn't necessarily the most obvious sector for generative AI to apply, because content generation isn't necessarily as front and center here as it might be in consumer and retail or some other industries there. So we're going to have a talk through of how it likely is applied, or it already is applying. Finally, part C, we're going to talk about how to get started, giving practical discussions around how you can actually get started with different applications, what the implications are for teams, for people in the organization. This is the sequence we're going to go through, and then we'll save some time for an interactive question and answer session at the end, where we can discuss any of your questions with the panel. So, ready to get started with part A, what is generative AI? We're going to turn this over to Anand to get us started. Anand, over to you.
All right. So generative AI is a class of machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms that can generate content. So they are essentially trained on multiple modalities of content: text, images, audio, code, voice, video, and they can also generate those modalities. We've all likely heard about ChatGPT or played with it. That's an example of text generation models, and their newest iterations are an example of multimodal models. I'll cover that in the next slide. But there's also a lot of systems that can generate images based on text prompts, or code generation systems that follow along as you program and are able to kind of understand the context of the code and the entire code base that you're working in and generate code for you. We'll see a lot more video generation examples. There has been some recent papers and research pushing the state of the art in terms of text to video generation. And in the long term, we'll see video generation, applying to Hollywood movies. And, there was a classic example, I think it was over the past weekend, or it might have been 1.5 weeks ago, where audio generation is now cropping up. And so there was a famous song, it was an AI generated song of Drake and The Weeknd that didn't actually exist. And it caused a lot of buzz and stir amongst the media. So we're starting to see the audio generation come up now. So next slide. So how does this all work? At the core of it, there is very specialized hardware. This hardware, typically graphical processing units or tensor processing units, represents the compute. And we're talking about very expensive GPUs. typically only available to large enterprise and or governments. Big tech companies have quite a bit of them on their cloud platforms. And training on those GPUs is a significant amount of data. That data is scraped from the internet. And if you can imagine trying to aggregate a significant amount of content, the majority of the internet, the engineering challenge of just storing it and scraping it, is pretty significant. From that, we have the models themselves, which are, there's varying deep learning architectures for those models. And the way you interface with those models are by prompting them, usually through text, but could be prompting them with an image as well, or other modalities. And they generate outputs. The applications like ChatGPT and some of the other applications that we interact with are just the interface. And typically they compose a series of models or a series of prompts and outputs of models into working functionality. During the session, you may hear us speak about things like a large language model or LLM. Essentially what that is really just a large neural network that's been trained to generate text outputs from text inputs. There's also text to image models. Those are the models that generate images from text. And then multimodal models, which can work across modalities. And they can generate from one modality to another and are trained on all of that data all at once. And so they're better at general purpose tasks. So we'll cover all of those topics during the workshop today, or during this session. I'll hand it back to Kevin, I believe.
Thank you, Anand, for that great introduction as to what generative AI is. Again, it's a confusing topic for a lot of people just because there's so much information going out there in the news. Hearing straight from people that have actually built these things and worked from it can really help in understanding what is it actually. Now, there's a lot of talk about content generation as part of this. Content generation, it's not necessarily front and center in ER&I. What I want to introduce is a discussion of these tools and techniques related to generative AI. How could these actually apply to the energy resources and industrial sector? So I'm going to ask our panelists to chime in a little bit on how they are looking to use them, how they're considering them, or how you see your peers looking in the industry, looking at using them and considering their use there. So Dan, I'm wondering if you can get us started on this topic.
Yes. We're taking a look at how we could utilize generative AI. And really that comes with this risk-based approach where we're understanding the technologies and figuring out how we can appropriately utilize them. So one of our first things we're actually looking at is ChatGPT and where there are efficiencies within the technology, and then how can we apply that to certain use cases. And similar to how you and Jessica were mentioning at the beginning, looking at those use cases are kind of case by case to understand, what is possible and what is safe to do, and then figuring out where there's applicability on top of that.
That's interesting. You said you're taking a risk-based approach. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's similar to our AI kind of strategy where we are understanding things like, okay, do you have certain things like biases involved, and how do you mitigate or eliminate some of those biases? Is it explainable and transparent? Do you understand what's happening within the system? Are you able to get kind of the intended output that you want, and how do you do that? Do you have the data in order to do that too? So there's many different aspects, I would say, that you would have to take a look at when assessing whether or not a artificial intelligence solution is feasible and applicable. And it is an interesting concept because there is really no set kind of rubric that you can follow every single time that will give you the right answer. It really comes with a diverse kind of understanding of where there potential could be issues, and then how do you put the proper guardrails and guidelines around it, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. I'm curious, have you ever found any, oh, sorry, Todd, I see you look like you're ready to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. To build on Daniel's comment there, I think the real first steps are taking that risk-based approach to understand what are the problem sets that are applicable to your company, to your enterprise, to your industry, and also recognize you don't need to do it alone. Like much like most of the technology advent and roll out the number of years, we're stronger together. So start to look at, forums such like this, bring partners together, bring industries together to start to understand what those problem and opportunities are. What are the associated risks? And how do you start to develop that plan collectively that's appropriate for your organization? But also, how do we solve this together to really get that network effect and benefit across all organizations in parallel or associated verticals?
That's an interesting comment, Todd, of solving this together, and a challenging one in energy and resources space, which tends to be pretty competitive as well. Have you found effective forums or ways for working together to address problems like this already, or any that you care to elaborate on?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of industry groups, that do forum across, whether it's energy and industrials that are there for sharing operating experience and OpEx. You can leverage those forums. Some of the most powerful ones are the ones you connect, kind of informally. Reaching out through your networks, whether it's through industry groups, whether it's through forums, whether it's through online communities, and helping to foster those loose connections actually, tend to be some of the most powerful and insightful relationships. I think the recognition that, we are organizations that are competing, but fundamentally the demand for most of our products, whether it's in the industrials or resources or energy, is that there's a massive increase in demand, and we have to meet that demand, for the benefit of our communities, for our jurisdictions, here in Canada and around the world. So, it's definitely I'd say a more sharing conversation than ever before, because we're in this journey together for a safer, better tomorrow.
I love it. The focus on safety, risk mitigation, very appropriate in a world where it's very asset intensive. We want to make sure that things are done right and in a safe way, obviously front and center. In these discussions you're having in these forums and with your peers and with others, are there certain applications or ideas that are really jumping out to you front and center? Now, I'll open this up to any of the three of you to chime in on what particular applications you're seeing. Dan, perhaps you can share.
Yeah, so I mean, I won't go into too much detail, but I think the kind of high level areas, categories that we see is essentially text and code generation, question and answering, and also kind of helping with some semantic searches. So those are really where we see a lot of our use cases based on, is kind of those main categories that I mentioned.
Very good.
I can add on to that, Kevin, as well. And, really, you look at our industries, as you said, they're incredibly capital intensive. They're normally long-lived assets that need to be maintained. They need to be serviced. They need to have, the right work at the right time to ensure that they continue operating, in the right, safe parameters. And because of their longevity, we have a massive, history on those assets across all of our respective organizations. But how is that really being leveraged today? Is it being left to that expertise of the individual teams to, pull that forward? Or can we actually supplement their knowledge and their capabilities by looking back across the maintenance logs, the histories, to understand what worked, well in that last time we encountered this situation on this piece of equipment? I think that's probably the most exciting opportunities. Of course, to Dan's comment earlier, it's open to also bias and blind spots in your historical data. So understanding that from the beginning, understanding where and how to supplement that and ensure that the various models can be trained on as complete of a data set as possible. And that's where that comment of we're safer together, can we combine some of those data sets in time here to really, we're operating similar equipment across different industries. A pump is a pump is a pump, regardless of how it's being used. Can we actually get the benefit together in a network effect well beyond what we have within our own enterprise borders?
Very good, thank you. We've got a question that's come in for the Q&A that seems to be relevant to the direction the conversation is going. So I'm going to ask the panel to chime in on this now. The question is, with such a massive sprawl of generative AI, what is the governance approach that can be applied by large enterprise so that we can take the benefit of the possibilities without impacting security, privacy, and organization IP? The IP question is a particularly interesting one. I've heard stories of at least one generative AI pilot project needing to get shut down because the AI model was actually sharing to the public some confidential IP of the organization that had trained and prepared it. So I wonder if anyone on our panel would like to chime in on that question.
I could jump in there, Kevin. So I think we see a lot of providers out there, large language model providers and other foundation model providers that are investing in building private and secure versions of their models deployable onto, let's say, public cloud, or even your private cloud and or on-premise infrastructure. So there are different patterns. As part of their terms, they are restricting the flow of data. So any data that's used to prompt the model, any data that's used to tune the model or retrain it, according to their terms, would not be used to train the underlying model itself. I think if you look at just the chat, like the chat GPT that is available publicly accessible, that's a different context and different contract, right? So like it is a research purpose contract, and they do say explicitly that the data you prompt it with can be used to retrain those models, right? So I think we're seeing the rise of the enterprise LLM, and it's no different than running models on or using the AI platforms and services available on cloud. Like that's the intention. Now, whether we can really test for these things and validate, so any data that you put in, private data, whether that's actually propagating, it's very difficult to actually validate. You must rely on the contracts that you have with your cloud provider. And that's just one way to protect. And I understand that there's another framework around, the legal framework within your organization, from a cybersecurity and security perspective, a different framework that should apply. And then I think the other things that Daniel said around, elements of what we call trustworthy AI, which is the ethics involved in terms of the solution you're using, the inherent bias within the data itself that's used to train those models. Certain elements of your organizational requirements around governance of models may not be met at this stage with certain providers out there.
All right. So coming back to the question of how it could apply to the energy resources and industrial sector, Sonia, I'd like to put this question to you. I know you have several years of experience, of leading edge experience, both working with these sort of models, developing them, both academically and in the satellite industry. So you've seen this on the cutting edge. Where do you see this going? What use cases do you see coming up on the near horizon?
It's a tough question just because things are changing so fast and so many new technologies are coming out. I think that a lot of it is going to be around the last question. A lot of it is going to be around the security of things and what kind of models are we going to leverage to make what kind of applications. Literally, because this is a generative model, as long as we know how it works, the applications are limited to your imagination and your understanding of the model, right? What I think would happen in the future is leveraging domain-specific information to build large language models or not so large language models. Now, one thing that I just want to clarify is that generative AI does not equal LLMs. And there's a lot of equation kind of going on there. It's not the same thing. You can have a smaller model that could perform generative tasks on a domain-specific thing, right? So I think that there's going to be a bigger and more collective realization of that, and seeing things like what Todd was talking about, just getting industry coalitions, let's call them, to gather that kind of information to be able to train these kind of models, or if you're a large enough organization with enough information, you can do it internally. So what I'm seeing for industry in particular, especially for large industry with a lot of data, a lot of sensors, just a lot going on, a lot of, even documents, there's so much to be ingested and so much to be leveraged. And I think a lot is going to be developed on domain-specific situations and applications.
Very good. Thank you. So I'd like us to start moving into the deep dives on some of these now. We've had some general perspectives. We've got some deep dives teed up for 3 particular use cases where I'm hoping our panel can speak in a little bit more detail around where they see generative AI applying to these use cases then. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just a few we've chosen for a deeper conversation then. The first use case is one that you've already heard come up during this conversation, which is supporting maintenance activities. When you're talking about large industrial facilities, you're talking about maintenance. They go hand in hand. There's a ton of maintenance work to be done. For our panelists on here, I would love to get your perspectives on how you could see generative AI solutions supporting maintenance activities in different ways, whether this be big use cases, custom trained, all the way through to light applications of pre-trained, whatever it may be. Dan, I'm wondering if you can go first, getting us started on this, the topic of maintenance.
This use case speaks to the younger me. I've been in situations where, as a field engineer, going down into the field, forgetting, all my different documents or not understanding what I needed to bring at that point in time. And then, having to go all the way back. And it's not a trivial thing to have to walk from your desk all the way down to the field. You have to go through security. So there's a lot of time that's spent with having to, if you forget a document or stuff like that. So where, I think the generative AI will definitely help is for you to be able to ask it, okay, I'm looking at a specific pump. Can you pull up all the documents that are associated with this? You could do things like, okay, what are some of the abnormal conditions that I need to be aware of in this situation? I'm doing a lockdown of this area here, right? And being able to pull up some of it. So kind of being able to utilize generative AI to kind of accelerate and help be more efficient when you kind of do your walkdowns. I think this is kind of going to help accelerate some of those maintenance activities. And then the other thing I would say is, I have been also in the situation, I'm not painting a great picture of myself, but when I was younger, forgetting what I observed in the field, because sometimes you're down there for hours on end and you'll forget things, right? So being able to then have generative AI to help generate reports right where you are and not have to take that downtime where you're just sitting there kind of writing the report. I think that's going to also help with the quality of those maintenance reports as well.
That's an interesting concept of taking reports right where you are there. Sonia, I wonder if this is something that you've seen already in terms of summarizing audio content. Is this a use case that is on the near horizon, already here, 5 years out?
For summarizing specifically audio content, I see it more in in the context of meetings or context where conversations are going on, more than when you're on the ground kind of trying to figure things out with the actual equipment. But when it comes to equipment, if you don't mind me kind of adding on to what Dan was saying, I think there's two very interesting use cases. One is in predictive maintenance. The other one is in troubleshooting and potentially remote troubleshooting. So in predictive maintenance, I want to bring that case because I think it's very important to mention. Maybe some know, maybe some don't, but it's important to mention that your data is very important. Generative AI cannot generate things that it doesn't know about. It can generate a lot of things, but if you want it to be specifically for your organization's, equipment and details and all of that, it has to be your data. So if you take that, you mix it with some maintenance logs, some sensor data, historical data, of course, paying attention to the gaps, you can have a generative model predict when you should either plan for failure, equipment failure, or maintaining your equipment and extending life or just being optimal in that. Why I'm bringing the other case, which is troubleshooting guides and automation, is because it brings another component, which is the latest in generative AI, which is agents. So basically being able to use tools. So if you can tell an agent or your generative AI interface to verify what is happening in a certain area with some equipment, if there is a component that needs to execute something, you can actually train your generative AI to use tools and remotely do that for you. Maybe in the future with hardware as well, but now it's limited to software. So that's where I see things kind of going, and I think they're already going that way.
Fascinating. Todd, you started touching on the maintenance domain right at the beginning there. Obviously, that's a big one for your organization. From what you've heard on this conversation, would you see it as having a big impact? Where would you see it impacting your team?
Yeah, absolutely. That remote expertise and that recommendation on understanding, the operating state of a piece of equipment, and then that recommendation of what the next troubleshooting steps could be based on that historical data, based on history, based on logs, based on past work on that piece of equipment. I think that ability to speed that expert recommendation, still supplemented and validated by that human expert to say, yes, this is the right next course of action. Like the opportunity is immense, especially for organizations here in energy and resources and industrials that are massively geographically dispersed. having that expertise, remotely available to that field engineer, to that field maintainer in some remote community on some really important critical piece of equipment is really a game changer, right? We've known about this possibility. We've talked about this possibility of AI for a long time. It's now at our fingertips to be able to put that into action and to, really drive that safe, reliable operation of equipment, at scale. So it's an incredibly exciting time, and we're just on that cusp across our industry and others.
Thank you very much, Todd. With the conversations having gone around the topic of risk already, I'd like to take us to a front and center topic related to risk on the next slide, which is cybersecurity. This is obviously front and center for the ER&I sector, especially for power generation. There's obviously a major issue. Todd, in your role as the Chief Information Security Officer, I wonder if you can give a perspective on what the cybersecurity considerations are with respect to generative AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. Clearly, with all technologies, there's usually a benefit and a downside, and clearly evident in this particular use case. The ability to use generative AI in preventative and detective measures, for our organizations and for our industries to identify, malware, to secure code as it's being developed, to make, and drive for better, more secure, solutions from the beginning is a tremendous upside. However, the same technology is in the hands of the threat actors. And so the flip side is also true, is that their ability to create malware, their ability to probe and look deep into networks to understand, identify, and exploit vulnerabilities that most humans never would have seen or would have known about is equally as daunting. So there's a yin and yang component to this around in this space. The other major component around cybersecurity is really just that information protection, right? We talked about that example earlier where there's going to be a really, advancing wave of parts of your organization of people that just want to use generative AI today, not necessarily knowing the risks and dumping a bunch of your information into a public research element like ChatGPT to try to drive for a better outcome, not knowing that they're publicly releasing that information. You may be giving away copyright and IP and really important, critical and confidential information to your business, being out in the public domain. So ensuring that we can really combat and understand across the enterprise the upside, but also the risk is of the utmost importance. I think this is the part of generative AI that has me the most excited and the most terrified all at once. But that's what keeps us moving forward in these capabilities, and why we've been driving at adopting new technologies at any given moment in history, whether it's cloud to now generative AI. It brings in and ushers in a whole new era of what we have to do, how we have to do it, and how we need to think about it. And it's no different here in cybersecurity.
Clearly an area of passion for you, Todd. That was fascinating. Dan, how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it definitely resonates. Protecting our data, like we're both in regulated industries where we have to not only maintain a lot of that privacy, but we're regulated too. So information kind of management and information security is kind of the utmost importance. But also from a opportunity perspective, like Todd was mentioning, there's just so much opportunity that I see. Like, for instance, imagine the logs that you get from a security a SIM, for instance, and having a human go through a lot of those logs, it's very difficult to do it. If you had, for instance, generative AI that could essentially point out where potential vulnerabilities are, imagine that was part of your playbook where attack was happening and you were able to quickly ask some type of artificial intelligence, hey, help me prioritize where most of my vulnerabilities are happening at this point in time, right? A lot of the times when we're in crisis, things become a lot more difficult to execute upon. So I think, the opportunities that will be arriving here in the near future with some of this stuff with cybersecurity is going to be vast. I also have a specific example where one of my colleagues was trying to ask it to do a SQL query, and it noticed in the code sample that there was a security issue. So the colleague wasn't even asking it to identify a security issue. it preemptively said, okay, here is the SQL query you're looking for, but your code there's a possibility for SQL injection, and it suggested actually better code in order to write that. So I think this is where the power comes in, is if we can utilize it in the safe manner like Todd was talking about, there's a lot of potential and possibilities to not only avoid the risk, but actually make us less risky in that situation.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so great discussion on cybersecurity. I'm going to move us on to our next deep dive now, which is contact center AI. This is one of the top topics for large language models and for natural language processing. It's happening in a big way. And Anand, I wonder if you can chime in briefly and share what you have done in terms of implementing a contact center AI system in the financial services industry and the outcomes you got.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So recently we implemented for a large financial institution in Canada, a conversational AI for their call center. So this AI is handling millions of calls per year. As customers are calling in, they can say one of 300 things, and the AI is able to understand what they're asking for, route them to the most appropriate agent. And for a subset of use cases, that agent is another AI system. So that other that other AI system is doing end-to-end self-service with fulfillment, meaning it's integrated to back-end systems, it's capturing data, it's actually going through an entire workflow to resolve that user's request. And so an example in this industry, which may be relevant, of one of the use cases that was implemented was address capture or address change. So the customer is moving, they'd like to switch all their accounts to their new address. We're able to do that right now actually faster than a human can do it, because the AI, one, is able to understand at human parity or better what's being said, and it's able to actually validate the address in real time with APIs like Canada Post. So, and it's able to autocomplete certain elements if the customer didn't provide it. So in the end, the CSAT score that was for a transaction like that was higher than the human experience. And I think with generative AI solutions and large language models, they are really good at. In the past, they have been used. This solution we started building 2 years ago, and in the past we were using large language models to actually develop it, but they were restricted in terms of their ability to generate. So we were using them to understand what the customer was saying at any given step of a conversation, with the rest being deterministic. So we'd essentially have a fixed response or a series of responses it could kind of work through. Now, I think the generative capabilities have really caught up, with the increase in size of the models, better architectures, better data. Now these models can actually respond and stay on track to some extent, depending on the pattern that you employ, And so, for example, ChatGPT is famously known for being 100% confident, but 90% accurate. I think that's the phrase that's out there. So it hallucinates a lot, is what we call it. Essentially, it says things with confidence that are actually not true. There are patterns now of reducing that risk to a level that's completely manageable from a risk management perspective, essentially to the point where it becomes an edge case and still have these things interface, right? So a lot is happening in the space. There's research to eliminate hallucinations entirely that's happening. And then there's engineering capabilities that we can enable or composition of models, essentially, to reduce the risk of these type of things. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to automate interactions and actually improve customer experience by focusing on your contact center with these technologies.
Thanks very much. Todd, Dan, do you see contact center as being something relevant for your industries of power generation? And if not, would you see it as being relevant to your peers in the ER&I space?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'll jump in first. Our organization doesn't have a customer-facing contact center, but like any large enterprise, you are having various service centers, whether it be for the technology service center or for HR, where again, getting information in real time, to the person that needs it in that moment is a huge use case for generative AI. Again, leveraging the back history of all the data we have and being able to understand our various programs, our different, employee offers, our different ways to access technologies, being able to, shift left in a real way, that service offering is a huge benefit to the employee or the individual looking for help, and also, allows the rest of the workforce to focus on those more complex and higher value items as well. So it definitely has, a lot of upside across our organization and across all of us in this industry vertical.
Awesome. This is exciting. So with that, I'd like us to move on to section C of our discussion. Questions of how do we get started there? I'm looking for practical discussions here. Is it risks? Is it guardrails? Is it specific use cases that are ready to go? What's the human impact? Is this going to cost jobs? Is it going to make work better? I am a living testament to the potential impact of technology of making work better. I am essentially deaf. I have about 95% hearing loss. 5 years ago, I couldn't communicate even face to face, whereas today, thanks to the technology of cochlear implants and the live closed captions that I get on this, which are powered by large language models, I can host a panel. It's life-changing. How do you see this technology impacting things on the human element? And how do we get started? Dan, I wonder if you would like to chime in on the getting started aspect of it.
Yeah, so at OPG, what we've done is we've done a pilot and deployed the Microsoft OpenAI Azure stack into our own internal Azure. So our information is protected in that sense, and we've asked also not to log any of our information. But then it's understanding, okay, where the applicability is. So like the similar example mentioned, we've connected it to some of our knowledge base articles, and we can get what we're calling Chat OPG to be able to answer some of those questions based on those knowledge base articles. The one thing I'll mention is similar to some of the inputs and the prompts, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So we're starting small and trying to understand where, what the applicability and usage could be. And also, from a data perspective, it's on non-sensitive data. But then I think to your question, how you get started, now we have to start training users to understand. So Jessica mentioned something at the beginning of this webcast, which is AI is now becoming more accessible to users. So there's no longer that, what I'll call price of admission or learning curve, where in the past you would need to know how to code and need to know some type of, whether it's data science. There was a kind of price of admission, like I was saying. So now you can utilize just plain language in order to get the machine to produce the output that you're looking for. So I think part of the what to do and get started, and what we've done internally, is educate our users and our stakeholders. So what does a good prompt look like? What does a good prompt not look like? What are hallucinations, and how do you avoid them by putting together some of the appropriate prompts? I was speaking with one of the members of my team, and I saw one of the prompts that he put in, and one of the prompts was almost more longer than the actual output of it. But it's funny to see, what the information that you need to put in order to get that quality result, and then being able to train those users in order to get that and recognize when you have false information and how to kind of pivot around that.
That's fascinating. It brings to bear a description I've heard of two different ways of using large language models. One is prompt engineering. It's using the pre-trained models in your day-to-day. Call that the light use, where you're using it to make things better and more efficient. The other is sort of big use cases where you're training your own special thing, training something completely different. As Sonia was mentioning earlier, you can build your own models based on your own data for totally new tasks. Fascinating to see the industry exploring different directions for getting started there. Now, whichever direction you're going, governance is obviously key. And Todd, I wonder if this is a topic that you can put in on. How do you govern this sort of thing? What are the governance considerations?
Well, the first thing when starting governance in any new technology is to be front and center about it. Acknowledge it, make it part of the conversation up front. Don't squirrel it away into the back. You've got to define and demystify, whatever that thing is. No different than when we had to do it with cloud starting in the early 2000s and demystifying what it could do or could not do for us. We need to do the same thing for AI and generative AI. The other element is to identify then, those eager first adopters and early adopters. Bring your community of stakeholders together early, because they're going to help to be the ones that help define where those use cases they're trying to solve that actually have a commonality across the organization or across the enterprise. Put their energy and their excitement around that particular use case to work. Because if you're not engaging that group, they're just going to find ways to go around it anyway, no matter what barrier you may put up, engineered or administrative or otherwise. Those eager first users will still find a way to try to get there. And it's not about being malicious. They're really, eagerly curious and really want to try and, apply a new technology or new approach. So define and demystify, engage, your broader community, create that community of practice. And that helps to then define what are the use cases the organization can collectively go forward with and start to form what that governance model would look like. Is it a relatively loose community of practice, or are there more stringent, terms of reference elements that need to be defined? The thou shalt and the thou shall nots. What does that, work for your organization is going to depend on the specific culture and the nature of your organization. If it's heavily regulated, you're probably going to have a more, regulated and more structured governance response. If you're a more nimble, smaller organization, you can probably start with a more, kind of loose and agile framework that you can check and adjust along the way. So it really starts fundamentally connect, and then figure out what those next steps are together.
Thank you, Todd. So we're just about at time for the questions and answer, but I'd like to open it up to the panel. If anyone would like to chime in around the human element of this. Is this coming for all of our jobs? Is this just going to make our lives incrementally easier? Is it going to replace me? Am I out of a job as a moderator or a consultant here? What's going to happen? Anyone like to chime in?
I heard someone talking about a study where in these situations, actually, the natural thought is to think that it's going to reduce the amount of jobs, but it's actually the opposite. Whereas you're automating a lot of the mundane portion of it, but again, it's allowing people to be able to do not only more but better with the technology. So I'm sure someone will fact check me in the chat here, but some of those studies show, I believe them, right? Like we're going to be able to now have more ability to do more, not only with our efficiencies and time, but with the type of technology that can give us better quality results, kind of accelerate some of our kind of work in that respect.
Hey, Kevin, I'll add to that. I think we just have to look to our collective history that, in various elements over the many centuries, that new technology has come for someone's job. And yet really that particular task definitely got automated or moved on, whether it would be the printing press, putting handwritten bookmakers out of work, or, the advent of, industrial agricultural, technologies into farming. Individual tasks and roles definitely disappeared, but it really, generated and bloomed whole new industries, whole new lines of, work, whole new lines of knowledge. And I would expect no different here from generative AI. It's going to impact a number of people around the world in the current job that they're doing. And that's where it's as important to say, what are we doing proactively to reskill, upskill, and take our labor resources and our workforces around the world and ensuring that they're successful if and when their particular role is impacted or supplanted by this next advance in technology.
Excellent. So now I'd like to take us to the Q&A and start with one of the questions that has come in, which ties into your discussion around upskilling here then. The first question we had was, encouraged by the use of generative AI for the use of technical logs, what level of upskilling might be required for teams? Who should be involved in starting these conversations? I know we've also had some discussions already on the last part of that question, which is any insights you can share regarding considerations for IP protection. Todd, can I ask you to chime in on this one?
Yeah, thanks. I think the most important first step is, those individual teams that are involved in whether your maintenance processes today that gather and create those technical logs. Do they know the why of the importance of the work when they're collecting and creating those logs? Could we, actually leverage, generative AI to make their work of collecting that information in the field easier, so that then generative AI can be applied, to that data and into improving the outputs. If you don't engage those teams in the why, let's use an example of a work order being completed. Some individuals may just say work done, and that's their closeout notes, versus someone putting detailed records of adjusted component 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, did a quarter turn on this particular element, and completed the maintenance as expected. One has a really high level of information and data, and one does not, and really that is being multiplied and networked into the training model. And so if the individuals at that point of data capture don't understand their importance in their role and in providing that great data upfront, as Dan mentioned earlier, that garbage in, garbage out element will just propagate. So involve everyone in that data value chain to understand the importance of the work they're doing and how it actually benefits the entire value chain throughout the life cycle.
Thank you, Todd. All right, one more live answer question before we move on to the exit poll. I'm going to ask the question of, are you seeing Gen AI being used by organizations to be more sustainable? Obviously, a key topic in this day and age. Has anyone seen an application of generative AI aimed at sustainability that they'd like to share or contribute on? I think we've had a tough question from the audience there. This is a great topic because generative AI is looking at doing things more efficiently, more effectively in many cases there. And one aspect of sustainability, it's not just doing different things, but it's doing the right things, doing things more efficiently, doing more with less there. I could see a direction going there with that. Todd, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sounds like a great use case we should be bringing back to our teams. Clearly one didn't fall off the tongue in the question there. I think the rest of our panelists were like, yeah, great idea. So I know that, as we start to look at, our path to, net zero around the world, the ability for generative AI to maybe help develop and demonstrate, better use cases, better outcomes, better paths to improving, particular plant operations or equipment operations to, reduce carbon, footprint. I think it's definitely a use case we've been going after. It's a really complex, optimization problem to really get to net zero and to really drive for a better tomorrow in reducing carbon across the planet. So I think it's an exciting opportunity to, go deeper on.
Thank you, Todd. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Aisha to close us out towards the end of the session. Aisha, would you like to take it over for the exit poll?
Will do. Thank you for that, Kevin. And thank you to all of our panelists and attendees of this session. It was definitely an interesting discussion and certainly one where we're seeing a move and a pivot for really the energy resources and industrial sector, but also embracing the change as well. So with that, we do have our regular exit poll, which we do want to share with you, and also some additional information on how to get that conversation started by really tapping into our generative AI labs that we have here at Deloitte. So if you are exploring the path of using generative AI and curious to see and network with others to understand use cases, possibilities, and even ways forward, feel free to reach out to a contact that we'll be providing in the subsequent slides. And we also want to share with you our upcoming list of events that we do have coming forward throughout the AI Institute. So in 2 days, we are continuing the conversation of AI and demystifying the topic as it relates to data monetization. We'll then continue on throughout the rest of the year with a number of other topics that we are going to progress in just continuing the conversation on AI. We do hope that you'll tune in for our future sessions and hope that you give us some feedback on the sessions that we've already provided for you today. And as always, all of our webcasts will be uploaded to our AI Institute website. So if you are unable to see the whole session, or if you'd like to share the session with others, feel free to reach out to myself and we will obviously put you in touch with those correct recordings. With that, have a great day and we will stay online for anybody to complete this survey. Thank you so much.